Welcome to Working Towards Our Purpose, a podcast that offers a different perspective on what a job can be. For everyone out there that's heard that voice in the back of their head asking for something more, it's time to listen to it. I'm your host, Gino, and join me as I interview people who have decided to work in their own purpose. Together, we will learn, become inspired, and hopefully find our own path towards working in our purpose. Adam Christoferson is the founder and driving force behind Musical Intervention, a place where people can feel welcome and play music together, no matter their background or situation. Adam grew up seeing firsthand the effects that trauma, drugs, and mental illness had on the people closest to him. Weaving through foster care and special education, Adam discovered that the transformative power of music was his anchor and his calling. He has a degree in recreational therapy, and after receiving a grant through the National Endowment of the Arts in 2015, Adam began to work with the homeless population in New Haven, Connecticut. During this work, he saw the need to have a safe, drug and alcohol-free space for the disenfranchised to be creative, productive, and connect with the broader community. Adam then partnered with Project Storefronts and opened the doors to the Musical Intervention headquarters in April of 2016 in downtown New Haven. Adam, thank you for giving us your time here and being on the podcast today. Excited to have a conversation.
Great to be here. And I'm sitting in that dream come true. So it's really, really cool.
Awesome. Well, I first heard you speak at a TEDx event in New Haven. And that's first where I got introduced to you and your story and what you do, and was intrigued since then. And, in prep for this, I listened to a lot of videos and podcasts you've been on. And I know that your story is not maybe the most succinct, but can you give us an idea of how you grew up and some things that maybe seem pertinent to give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. So music, right, is kind of like the thread throughout my entire life. The year I was born in 1983, my uncle actually had a big hit on the radio, and that was the beginning of things looking up for our family, as far as my mother was concerned. And, going to those concerts were a big deal, and seeing kind of the power of music and going backstage and learning all about that. But really music became rooted in me when my father brought me a drum set at about 8 years old. And that's really when I discovered kind of the world of music and finding a safe place in that, and then a way to communicate with other people. So I had all these friends coming over and jamming for hours on end and just having a great time expressing ourselves. Yeah. And then never really wanted to let that go. Picked up guitar and started writing songs, taken from some of my experiences in poetry and stuff like that. Then kind of snuck into college, found a degree of recreation therapy, which was a real, just a meant to be moment for sure. And started working at the Yale Child Psychiatric Inpatient Hospital, where I continued to kind of write and record original music with the kids there, and saw the impact that music had on me, was having also on them, and then really was able to start working in other places and develop this passion project, kind of community service, all wrapped into one. And then from the original conception of having a space that could be a creative space, what was called Cafe Cave when I was 17, to 8 years ago in 2015, when I got the keys to open up a space that is sober and creative, and recording studios and music and coffee and just good company, good vibes all around. And so that's a full dream come true kind of moment. And so I'm kind of living in that. Even just today, we were jamming around here, and I'm just looking at all of these people working together, people that wouldn't typically be hanging out, just laughing and enjoying themselves and creating and collaborating together, and just super grateful to have this life, really. And it's just it's pretty amazing to watch it unfold in front of me.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing, and definitely going to get into, different aspects of that. I guess I'm curious to what drew you to music initially? What was it about music that made you kind of latch on and not want to give it up? Because it seems like it was a constant throughout your life.
Definitely. Geez. Well, I think having a famous relative and them being successful in music, as far as huge concerts and, something important was happening there. And, that was pretty stark in comparison to like living in foster care or living like in poverty, really. And so there was something about music being kind of a savior. And I had thought for many years that was my uncle. That's the savior right there. He's the one who's going to swoop in and save the day here. But really, all along, it was the music. And I think those early experiences of having full access to getting backstage and seeing how the whole thing works, and even getting a chance to hop on the drums before everybody got to the concert hall, those things were like paramount. And so the moment when I got the drum set and I started like learning the instrument and learning how to be a musician, I'm pretty sure that was when I would be able to kind of close my eyes and kind of discover a world that I can exist in, that's mine. And no matter what was going on in my reality, music really gave me a safe place that I felt important. I felt like heard and understood. So yeah, I think those two key components, having really close experiences to large concerts and also learning the actual instrument, those things were pretty foundational for me.
Yeah, definitely seeing like someone that becoming a success, I guess, and that being an inspiration to kind of like let you know that that's a possibility for you. I know that they always say that like entrepreneurship runs in the family, and I think that it's because you can see somebody who's doing that thing, and then therefore it makes it a little bit more accessible to you because you know that somebody has done it. So that definitely makes sense to me. But I guess I also wanted to ask you about like, developing an identity, like as a kid, like when somebody first is like developing their own identity. I think for me, it's something that I've struggled with for a while because I kind of went down on a path that wasn't necessarily like the thing that I wanted to do. And then kind of hit this point where I was like, who am I, right? Like, what am I even doing? What do I want? And I think a lot of people kind of relate to that. Did music kind of help you solidify an identity, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, there was a lot. There's a lot going on, in those formative years, middle school, right? High school, like elementary school, you're kind of just, you are yourself. You don't really have a choice, right? You're just kind of being yourself. And then middle school impressions, right? Certain people in your life start telling you different things, like that's cool, that's not cool. And I was trying to desperately find out how I could not be alone because I'm an only child. And so I was like, yeah, I'll do drugs and I'll do crazy stuff. And I was really following that. And sports were really big for me. Like they did keep me out of a lot of trouble. And I loved being competitive, really enjoyed being competitive. And those were identities that I still hold pretty tight as far as like wanting to win and wanting to be great at whatever I'm doing. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the big change happened in the end of middle school into high school, where I got hurt in sports and I was really upset with the way I was being treated as far as like, I earned my like college litter my freshman year and I was like super excited about that. And then it got stripped from me because I got in trouble in class because I was a special ed kid and I was, kind of bouncing off the walls a little bit. And so I got really frustrated with that. And then I started getting really creative. And my grandmother turned me on to poetry when she was raising me. And she would read poems to me. And it was always really special. I had really special moments with poetry. And so I took up poetry before I started writing songs. And I think there was something about just hopping on a bus, going to like Yale, New Haven, sitting under a tree, and just like going into my imagination and just writing about my feelings, writing about who I think I am or who I am in this world, that really helped me anchor who I am. And so poetry gave me space to think, and then music shortly after, with like writing songs and playing guitar and stuff, really became how to live. Who am I and how am I going to live? And I'm going to live with power and passion, and I'm going to be loud, and I'm going to express myself without thinking about how it sounds to people. And those were like, then I just like within the first year of like writing songs and guitar, I was doing like open mics at coffee shops and stuff like that. Right. So at that point, like, hey, I'm a singer-songwriter. right? And, whether or not, this is graduating high school about this time, I put out an album. I was like, yeah, I'll get in a car, drive across country, just like playing music everywhere without any idea how the hell I had any money to do any of this stuff. I think my father just gave me like probably $1,000, and I had to like figure out how to get around the country and back in $1,000 because there was no, safety nets there. And so it was just magical. I knew that I had my identity as a musician, as a songwriter, and I stood for a lot of what I heard my uncle sing about, which is love. And I always sang about that, sang about love and honesty and truth, and just wanted to be as close to that as I possibly could with everybody I met. And so that's really the identity that I still carry with me today. It's the just be vulnerable and say what's on my mind and do what I want to do, but ultimately try to help make the world better in any way, shape, or form that I can. And that's from cleaning up after myself to building a place where people can just walk in freely and create together. So
yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for articulating that. That's definitely something that I noticed about you. Like I saw you speak, but then we kind of bumped into each other at a networking event. And I did notice that the way that you spoke with passion and like you could feel, your energy coming off of you. And like, it's definitely something I always try to, go more towards. I'm not always the best at being 100% vulnerable and that sort of stuff. I'm working on it. But yeah, it's cool for you to articulate it like that. I guess I'm curious as to like, so that's kind of you at like graduating high school, becoming confident in like who you want to be. What then drove you to go to college and get the degree? Did you have any like plans, or did you just want to do music?
Yeah, I definitely didn't want to go to school anymore because being in special education, like all you do is get the label, and it's just like, it was just a nightmare, academically speaking. So I was dating a girl, Abby, and she was great. She introduced me to her mother, who was a social worker, and she also wrote songs. And I was just enthralled with her mother. I just thought she was like God in form. I mean, she would sing these songs, and like they had birds, and the birds would be like singing. But anyway, she set me up to work with some of the women that she was working with at a program called Village of Power. And this was part of Hill Health Center at the time. And she's like, yeah, just bring your guitar, write some music with the ladies, and and we'll pay you for your time. And I ended up just loving it so much. I ended up doing like their web design and like doing all this other stuff. I was like, oh, I can get paid and help people at the same time. Like, wow, that's cool. That went somewhere right into my brain. Some kind of reward system happened there. So my girlfriend's like, oh, you should go to school, go to college. And I was like, I'm done with college. Like, I'm done with school. That's it. I'm just going to make music, see what happens. And I started thinking, at the time I was working with politicians, and we started this thing called Cafe Cave Performing Arts Center. And we were setting up a nonprofit, and we're having like these events. And then it kind of died down, and it became evident that like, maybe I should go to college and see like what there is to see about that. And I happened to know the vice president at Southern at the time. He was a family friend. And there was no way I had the grades or the SAT scores to get into Southern at the time. And he's like, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to run this kind of community coffee shop, creative place. I want to, get a college degree, see what this whole thing is about. He's like, do you want to be an RA? Do you want to, do you want to be on student government? And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. Of course. And so like he put me as an RA, right, freshman year. I skipped like a semester or two. So I was a little bit older than the freshman, but I already had like this experience, this life experience of traveling the country and doing different things. And yeah, and so college was just really great for me because it worked with my independence, all right? And I didn't have the label of going in as a special ed kid. I could just literally just be myself walking in, and what I did to perform, my grades would reflect that. And I wasn't likely to get kicked out of class. Actually, I did get kicked out of one class in physics because I was like, just my mind was blowing up and I couldn't stop asking questions. And she asked me to leave because I was asking too many questions. So college was just really great for me. I graduated with like a 3.8, right? I mean, it took me 11 years because I ended up leaving and falling in love, going out to Hawaii and experiencing homelessness over there, and then coming back depressed and near death door. But yeah, so like I found my way back to Southern, found a degree of recreation therapy. And then that's when I was able to like work at the dementia unit with elderly who responded to music. And I was like, oh, wow, I can use music in this place too. Like, that's kind of cool. And then that door opened to work at the child psychiatric hospital. I was like, yeah, I record music. Like, hey, can I bring in my recording gear and record these kids? And they were like, yeah, of course. And I was just like, that's all she wrote. Just awesome. And so Southern really gave me that opportunity to be able to get these internships. And then years later, they ended up putting me on like the alumni magazine, which is crazy for like a special ed kid to be on the alumni magazine of a university. So super proud of that. And super proud of Southern and everything they do for just a wide range of people. So yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
I had some fun too.
So with the degree, was it something that like you then went into pursuing musical therapy and like trying to help people with music, or was it more so you were kind of already doing it? And then I know you got a grant awarded you to start working with homeless people. How did that all kind of intertwine?
Sure. So yeah, I got to a crossroads working on the inpatient unit, whether I wanted to continue as a recreation therapist, which is a certification that you can get and you work with insurance and stuff like that, or kind of branch off and do my own thing, which is kind of my MO. So I just said, let me just simplify. And I started, I left Yale after working there 5.5 years. And I started just kind of going out to different facilities and writing and recording original music. And, these are people with intellectual disabilities. I was working at drug rehabs. I was working at all kinds of places. And, I didn't have to work like crazy because I got paid well to do what I was doing, which is a huge help from my supervisor at Yale. She's the one who told me how to charge. And I was like, because I would have just done it for cheap. You know what I mean? I was just doing what I loved. But she's like, no, what you're doing is like very valuable. And like not anybody could just walk into a room full of people and write a song with them. So this is what, the typical price is. And I'm like, really? I can charge that much money? She was like, yeah, like try it. And I was like, okay. And that was the beginning of being able to like really value the service I was bringing to the table as far as financially, so that, I could really focus on those projects and focus on like the bigger picture of like what I wanted to shape my life into and what kind of impact I wanted to make in the world. And so being able to work smaller amounts of hours in one location enabled me to kind of think broader and start like expanding my reach. So I ran for mayor in 2013 because that's what you do when you have some time on your hands. And the mayor at the time was saying some really crazy stuff. And I thought, maybe I can make an impact on my community if I ran for mayor, living with my parents, and like not having any money. Sure, I can run your town. So I carried 2% of the vote, which was crazy because there was more votes than any independent in 16 years with the $250 campaign fund. Okay, that's a little brag, a little casual brag.
Wow.
But I realized like what would happen if I actually got in there? Then I would have to play the game, and I'm not interested in playing anybody else's game but my own. As long as it works for the greater good, then I'm willing to compromise a little bit. And so I was kind of like 2013, I was like, all right, Adam, what are you going to do now, buddy? So that was when I decided, all right, let me just focus on musical intervention and just like focus and see what happens. And that's when opportunities started opening up in New Haven. A friend of mine had a restaurant on Chapel Street called Inspired Turkey, and which we wrote a jingle for, Inspired Turkey. And he let me run open mics there. And there was a representative from the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven. And he's like, wow, look at this really cool, diverse kind of open mic. Like, who are you? What are you doing here? And I was like, I want to inspire New Haven, right? I want to just change this whole thing up. I want places to have art and music and creativity. And I want to do all of these things. And he's like, cool. Like, I'll put you in touch with somebody. And so I followed a chain and then ended up with the Arts Council of Greater New Haven. And they set me up with a couple of small grants. And one of those in particular, I started doing open mics at the soup kitchen. And that was just freaking awesome. It was just unbelievable. The talent that would just come up and start singing, everybody's eating, like they're enjoying the music. And then I started meeting these people who didn't really have a lot going on during the daytime except for like hanging out at the green and like, trying to stay alive and things like that. And they welcomed me in and we started doing life together. And we started writing songs together, and I was doing workshops at the homeless shelter. And just again, society is just not built. The one we're working in right now in the US is just not built for the creatives, the ones who can't keep up with the education system or the job security or any of those things. You've got all these intelligent, brilliant artists and musicians and expressions, so many people who, for one reason or another, couldn't keep up with the system and fell into addiction or serious mental illness or homelessness, you name it. And it's really sad because there's so much opportunity in America if you can afford it, if you can show up on time. But yet the creative people typically think a little differently and work a little differently. And so anyways, I sidetrack. So I'm around all of these really creative people, and we got kicked out of the place we were renting because the guy didn't want us to be, he didn't want homeless people rehearsing where we were renting, which I gave him money for. So I felt what they were feeling a little bit as far as just not being welcomed. I mean, I knew that feeling already, but this was kind of like, hey, I just gave you money. We're using your space to rehearse for a show. And now we're rehearsing outside in December on the green in New Haven, getting ready for a show. So this great opportunity happened right after that, where Project Storefront, Eleanor Slumba, who was in charge of Project Storefront, knew what I was up to. And she said, hey, there's this place that might be available coming up. Like, if you want to take a look at it. And we just fell in love with the space. And after we were done with that project, I had all these people and nowhere to put them. And I didn't want to just say, all right, like, nice knowing you. Thanks for taking part. Like, have a good life. I wanted more. And so I pulled the trigger on this place in December 2015 with no money. I mean, I was still on state insurance, I was just breaking up with my girlfriend. So I was back to living with my parents and no money, right? And like no idea how I'm going to be able to afford it. And we had, a good deal going where I didn't have to pay rent or utilities for 6 months. So I just started asking my dad for help, and he would help me build the walls. We got the permit to build, and it was just this crazy thing. And people just started chipping in and donating their time and freeing up themselves. It was just crazy watching it all come together. And then okay, but the money's going to have to start coming too. And that was crazy. So we did an event, the grand opening, and the newspaper took out an article. And then Bob Cole, who is the COO of CMHC, saw it and was like, oh man, I want this for people at the Connecticut Mental Health Center. How could we help Adam, what he's doing, with musical intervention? And then he was able to secure a contract where I could work on site at CMHC. And that money that I was making there, I would put into, once the rent came in, which it did, I started just putting that money into the space. And so it was all volunteer, including me. And, it took me a good 2.5 years to meet my wife, get out of state insurance, and start actually, breaking even.
Wow. Yeah. That sounds
crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It sounds like the driving force behind it though was the idea that you had and being sure of the place that you want. I think it's interesting the different perspectives that people have on business. A lot of people, you want a business plan, how's it going to start making money and all the specifics and stuff like that. But it seems like you didn't think about any of that and just had the one idea that you wanted and then started collecting people around you that saw the vision that you did. And then somehow it just came about and things started falling in place. Do you think about that at all?
I wish it was that easy. It wasn't that easy, right? I mean, I do have a business mind where I had to put the business plan together, right? I had to do the numbers and I had to look hard numbers in the face, right? But I was advised early to start a nonprofit and then take the small steps, right? Get your board together, start raising some money, do a couple of events, right? And go that route. And I was like, well, that's not going to happen because I have these people that need help right now. And the only way to do that is to make your own decisions. And you can't really do that with a board, right? A board has to approve all of the decisions. So I just thought, like, I'm not ready for a board. I'm not ready to answer to anybody except for myself and the entities that I will work for. And so the money, like, it was magic, yes, in a sense that, like, the opportunities were coming. And that's like spiritual, right? How the timing of all these things work. But being a good steward of the money and finagling everything, just being able to navigate so many huge changes as a small business owner, right? From your own salary, right, to the bills, to stipends for people who are helping out and who are really in need of stipends, to negotiating your lease and your rent, and in a downtown New Haven space, full well while managing so many different types of personalities that are coming in the door as you are maintaining your drug and alcohol sober space, in a challenging environment with addiction running crazy rampant everywhere. And, people always say music and addicts are a lot of times are happening at the same time. And there is truth to that. But I think what we've been able to stand for is that music can be completely separate from addiction and from drugs. And there is a high that you do get in music, and there's a meaning that you get from music that sometimes drugs take away from you. Yes, it's more enjoyable because you are high, but at the same time, like, you are risking a lot more by going into those different worlds. So I carry myself like it's all magic, because it is. But the idea of, like, running the business and turning a profit and eventually not doing things for free all the time became, an important aspect. And then lessons now that I'm training other people in is, like, valuing yourself and making sure that you can stand up for yourself and not get pushed around simply. I mean, just by doing a good thing, people want to push you around. That's been my experience. I've been pushed around by the city of New Haven. I've been pushed around by my landlord and by many other entities within the city of New Haven. But I didn't back down, because I stood with the people I was with in the place that I created, right? And I always try to go back to that place, especially when I get discouraged that it's not supported by entities that want to take credit for it being in New Haven, but at the same time, like, not putting any of the bills that cost to run the place. And one organization in particular that supported me in my time of need here is the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. We had just had a flood in the back here. It was about 3 years into owning the space. And I was kind of, like, burning out, and it was just so busy. I had like 30 volunteers. It was just so amazing. And then, one of the representatives from Demas came in, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. You have people who are down and out. You have Yaleys, you have retirees, all mixing and just making it work in this place. Like, how is this sustainable to you, Adam?" I'm like, "Well, I'm just living the dream, making it work." And they were able to put down a good amount of money every year so far for rent and to ensure that music's being made here. So huge shout out to the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services for believing and seeing what we've been able to accomplish here, and continue to invest in that. Although we've asked for more and we haven't been granted more, it's got to be its own timing. And I think that's what I'm also learning in this whole process, is that, like, I can push and push and push and push. And if I push and get discouraged, everybody else is going to pay for that. It's just going to be a negative vibe. If I push and accept the results, right? Or if I receive and just let the results play out as they do, and return to the music and return to the smiles that happen here on a regular basis, it does somehow work itself out. It has been my experience,
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think it has to do with, like, getting outside of yourself and, like, kind of leaning on the people that are around you, and then kind of, like, almost fighting for them in a way that's best for them. Is that kind of like what you're
I think
saying? Or
the second part is what you're right. Fighting for them, I think, is the key component to everything. I do feel a bit of an island. I have a responsibility to this space more than any person, if that makes any sense. So holding the space is the first step, is to be like, all right, integrity, seek the good in everybody that comes through the door, right? Give people the extra chances, let them know when they've gone too far, kind of stuff. And with that relationship, you have to kind of be separate but together. You know what I'm saying? And that only works if your entire life, if your entire business, I guess you could say, it's been my life, but is to stand in the gap for the people you're serving, like to fight for them, to put what you've seen and what you've experienced through them in the broader public discussion, right? About homelessness, about drug addiction, about rape and abuse, about prejudice, about all these different things that are going on in people's lives that really can tear them down, to make those things known, to make a person feel like they're heard and that they can share their story and empower them to share their story through music, through activism, through whatever. That makes it okay to sacrifice maybe some of the things I miss by being completely present with people. You know, I want to be there for people, but I can only be there so much because I'm holding space for so many people.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like when you say you're being present for people, does that also tie in with like vulnerability? Because I think the word vulnerability kind of ties into the whole thing. Because in my experience, the more vulnerable I've been, the more help you get from the people around you, right? And people can see the things that you're struggling with, and they become less of a burden on your own self. And I think music is in and of itself a vulnerable thing to like sing in front of people and to like write lyrics that, you know, came from your soul, right?
Yeah.
What do you think makes, and maybe this might be my perspective, but like you seem to be pretty good at being vulnerable, and do you think about like what makes you good at that, or like what would you say to somebody who's like maybe not good at being vulnerable? Would you have any advice?
I think what you had said, it was really great because music, it really does give you the opportunity to communicate with other people that you're playing with the audience, or whatever, differently than you might feel talking about sports or whatever else people are talking about. So I think, you know, the ability to improv, the ability to have a freedom to say what you don't know is going to come out without having to think about or process what's going to come out of your mouth when you start talking, is a real strength. It's a great tool to have. And a lot of people don't allow themselves the opportunity to trust fall into their own arms and trusting themselves that whatever comes out is going to be authentic to themselves. And, you know, you have to cast out fear to be able to do that. Because if you're thinking about how is this going to sound with, or how are people going to judge me, or, you know, any of those thoughts, you're not going to be able to do the trust fall. You're not going to be able to be vulnerable. And so the lesson to like improvisation, the lesson to just like throw yourself out there into, you know, 4 bars that you have no idea what they're going to be about, but you got a chord progression going and you're just going to start singing and you don't know what it is, but you're going to trust that whatever comes out, you're going to ride. And that skill, I think, is something that served me really, really well in life. And, you know, of course I piss off a lot of people by saying things that maybe I'm not thinking clearly and I'm just saying them. And, you know, there's prices to pay for everything you do. And who knows what's right or what's wrong, right? But like the opportunity to give that skill set to people and to get people to take that step, to be able to trust themselves, to say what's on their mind without thinking, and then let the mind catch up to it, I think is probably the best advice I can give to anybody who's trying to be vulnerable, and maybe it even makes it a little easier because it takes some of the thinking out of it for people. Because I know a lot of people, like they really think long and hard before they say anything, and a lot isn't said. And, you know, again, whether it's what's right or what's wrong doesn't faze me. But there are a lot of people in this world that can use positive affirmations and words of wisdom and knowledge. And if everybody's keeping their mouth closed, then these words aren't going to be spoken, and people are going to be delayed in their, you know, freedom. And so that's why I truly believe that people can be that vessel, and creatives especially, who can create something out of nothing, have the opportunity to send messages to people that can uplift them, make them think deeper, give them opportunities into other ideas that they might not have put together. Again, joy, fun, sadness, empathy, all of those key, you know, human experiences happen because people share and they express, and a person can vibe off that and then share back. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah. No, yeah, I love that. And it makes me think about too, a lot of times people are never like asked of their opinion, or never like, you know, their opinion isn't valued, or maybe they're growing up, their opinions were scolded or told that's not the right way to do it. And I think what you're doing is you're finding communities of people, and through music, asking them like, what do you have to say? You know, with your guitar, what do you have to say?
Yeah.
And giving them that power to like be sure of their own inner thoughts. And I think like that's the greatest like gift you could give somebody. And
that's cool.
Like, man, to think of like purpose, like that's just crazy.
I was just thinking, because like one of my favorite things I've been doing is called Write a Song with Me. And it started years ago with a little sandwich board. And it would say like, you know, write a song with me. And I'd be sitting there with my guitar, and I'd have an empty seat next to me, and somebody walking down the street would hang out. They'd be either waiting for somebody or whatever. And we would just write a song right there. And it's really funny. My favorite part is when somebody's like, oh, I don't know how to write. And then I just literally take those words, I don't know how to write, and I start singing. They're like, oh, you just say whatever? I'm like, yeah, you just say whatever. And then we'll make logic of it as we go along. But like, it's going to make sense. You just have to start. And I feel like that's a huge like tripping spot for people. They just don't have the courage to like just drop something. And you know, it's really freeing to watch people go through that process and be like, wow, like I wrote a song, like holy crap, didn't ever think I was going to do that. And you kind of take the magic out of the music making, right? You make it accessible to people. And that's like what it was, right? Hanging around the fire, telling stories of like your ancestors through song. And that's what we're supposed to be doing, because our brains are limited and music occupies the entire brain. And that's why we're able to remember song lyrics but can't remember books. You know, short stories are tough, but like the music opens the brain, and then the lyrics are just little crumbs. It leaves all over the brain, and our brains are able to just put it all together because we have so much emotion behind it. It's so engaging. And that's one really cool thing I like about like the research that we're doing with Yale now. So like one really cool thing is I met this guy, Dr. Philip Corlett, because there was a research grant that the National Endowment of the Arts, the Kennedy Center, and the National Institute of Health collaborated with, called a sound grant, or a sound initiative. And it's for, you know, music programs or interventions that can impact mental health. So Dr. Philip Corlett focuses specifically on neuroscience, and one of his specialties is hallucinations. And which is really interesting because my mother has paranoid schizophrenia with auditory hallucinations. And so we meet up, we put this kind of proposal together with songwriting, karaoke, song listening, and we give it to the NIH, and they accept it, and we get awarded this like $2.3 million research grant to look over 5 years on how these small groups of songwriting and music groups impact people, and whether or not the distress level of their psychosis, of their auditory hallucinations, decreases or increases based on these interventions. And yeah, after 2 years, we got some really positive data back that allowed us to pursue another 3 years of studying the intervention, and unlocked the phase 2, which is like the karaoke and the song listening and all these other things. And it turns out that people's language change in these groups. And I'm really excited. We have another year left before all of these data points are going to be super collected and published. And maybe we can piggyback on this and do more populations and see, how community and song making in community, it's about as tight as you can get, really impacts serious mental illness, and how we can bridge the gap of, people that are isolating because of their mental illness and bringing them into the fold of a larger community of people that are doing things that they do well, as opposed to being like, well, all of the schizophrenics are over here and all of the addicts are over here. And we just compartmentalize all of these populations, as opposed to being like, well, what about the arts? What about sports and woodworking and all these different engaging activities, which is all recreation therapy, very, very, very focused on leisure education. How can broader communities come together and learn from each other like we should be, and living more full lives, right? So that's the key component.
Yeah, that's super cool. I mean, it's an area of therapy that I never even really knew much about. So it's cool to hear how it's actually affecting, and getting Yale in to get numbers behind it is the coolest thing.
Oh.
And I heard you say somewhere, it might've been a video or podcast, about communicating with your mother, and sometimes it can be tough, but when you play music with her, she kind of comes alive, and I don't know, that really struck me, and made me think about the power of communicating in that way. And yeah, it's just, it's a magic that I think a lot of us take for granted, because music is so accessible nowadays that you put it on through everything and don't really think too much about, how it got there, or what inspired it to get there. But yeah, that's both good and a bad thing, I guess. But yeah, it's really cool to encapsulate music in all this.
Two things really work for my mom the most. Music is great because I can, if she's kind of out of it a little bit, I can invite her on stage and then start singing this thing, and then she could start improvising, and then we'll have a good couple laughs, and I'll have my mom back. But the other thing is just really cool, which I want to know more about, which is I'll get behind my mom and I'll just massage her back a little bit, and I'll get into that deep tissue. I'm Swedish, so I can do the Swedish massage. And I swear it's a light switches in her, and she comes out for air every time. And there's something really beautiful about that I really want to look into, as far as massage therapy on psychosis and muscle tension, and how those things impact our mental health. And obviously it's tricky, right? I'm her son, so she enjoys a massage from her son, right? So there's a lot of things you'd have to look at, as far as paranoia of people and different things. But there's got to be something, muscle kind of stimulation mixed in with positive reinforcement from family or something, because that's what it is, right? Mental health is there's a lot of biological stuff going on, but a lot of it also is these triggers and these terrible lessons that we've learned and we've perceived, that we have so many gaps to fill and ways to protect ourselves. And some are helpful and some are not. And so, yeah, this massage, something as simple as going behind my mom, giving her a massage, and then all of a sudden she's light on her toes and we're dancing, and you know what I mean? So cool to watch that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's definitely super interesting. And if you've ever read the book, The Body Keeps Score, I'm sure that has something to do with it too, the embedded trauma in the tissues and the muscle, and somehow massaging it is releasing that negative energy. That's super interesting, especially in combination with music. How much healing you could do with that, man.
Let's do it right in here too. I turn the lights off, and it got we'll get the chakra sounds, certain chakra sounds, right, with the sound bed,
certain frequencies.
Oh yeah. So I do want to talk a little bit about music therapy. So I'm not a music therapist. Southern just opened up a music therapy department, and I'm thinking about it, but it's what I'm doing is so much more just studio production, right? And I happen to be able to work with people who express themselves differently than a typical client coming to your studio to record their next hit, right? And so it's just an ability to work with a larger clientele. But the field of music therapy, I think, is really important because it's very specific, and it has a lot of really great, I'm going to use the right word, applications in so many settings. And for people interested in helping people with music and their talent, I think music therapy is just a really great way to do it. I preferred recreation therapy because it's so much more broad. You can do music, you can do art as therapy. So, for example, my wife is an art therapist, right? And if I'm a rec therapist, right, and I'm doing art, I can't call myself an art therapist, right? I can't call myself a music therapist if I'm doing music as a recreation therapist, right? I'm doing recreation therapy. And so there's room for all of those things, especially in like inpatient settings and a lot of rehab stuff. But there's also like the dynamic, and this is like something important that I really want to like somehow influence in my life, which is the dynamic between a therapist and a patient is of a hierarchy, right? And there are a lot of rules for good reason to not cross boundaries. However, the person coming to you for help is very much identifying as the diagnosis. Like, I have this diagnosis, therefore I can get services from you. And I just feel like even with the research thing, like, hey, like I have paranoid or I have auditory hallucinations, I can qualify for this study. Now I'm identifying as somebody who has auditory hallucinations in order to get, this great compensation, $500 of compensation. I know it's 700. And, like we've had really great experiences. I just don't like that dynamic of somebody having to be like, here's my diagnosis. Now I get a green light to get something from you. And I feel like that's more of an amen to something that, you struggle with. And so it's kind of putting like a positive, weird like value on this diagnosis to be able to get like the housing, right? The benefits, the insurance. And I just feel like that identity, yes, I mean, it's hard. How can you imagine not having a system that you have to identify as this to get that? But I feel like what we're doing at Musical Intervention, which is you don't need a diagnosis to come in here. You just want to play. You want to make music. You're coming in as a guitar player, not as somebody who has bipolar, right? Like there's something about what's happening here that's giving people their identity back, and their identity at their core, not their identity through their diagnosis, but their identity of what they're passionate about, who they are, like how they want to express themselves. And I just want to see more of that in the world. I want to see more opportunities for the people who are casted out of society because they express themselves differently to now be like celebrated in the community because they express themselves differently.
Yeah. And I think another differentiation too is one is something somebody's telling you and the other is something you're choosing, right? Like you're walking in there saying, I'm a guitar player. But like if you walk in and get a diagnosis as bipolar, like you're not really choosing that, right? But you can choose to be a guitar player or a musician.
Right.
So that's super interesting. That's like, man, I could talk to you for like an hour about that, but we are kind of getting to the end of our time. But I do have to ask you about purpose and, your thoughts on it. That's part of the name of this podcast, part of what's got me on my journey. What are your thoughts on purpose? Is it something you think about? Is it something that's important to you? Yeah, let me know your thoughts.
Sure. Purpose is a gift. I think if you can visualize something that you're passionate about and something that you care about and something that serves the greater good, the humans, animals, and the earth, something of positive nature, something constructive, if you can imagine your life contributing to those things in positive ways and then figuring out a way to financially be able to sustain yourself in it, you've got kind of a perfect storm for your purpose. Now, there's purpose, obviously. You could pursue things that maybe you won't be able to get financially rewarded. So you have to do other things to compensate for these other things that you want to do. And that's called sacrifice. Anybody with children learn that right off the rip. And I think that there's room for that in this thing because, it is a system created by humans, so it's not perfect. And, it would be great if people can just be like, oh, I have a purpose to do this. Great. Here's the green light. Here's all the money you're going to need to do it. And so, I mean, I worked trades so many years, right? And while I'm doing the trade work, I'm thinking to myself, oh, like, man, if I could just be making music right now and like touring and making tons of money and like having tons of like, never mind. If I could be doing that life right now and not like sitting up on top of this roof melting, then, I'd be living my purpose. And, there's lessons that you learn and appreciations that you get by doing the hard thing, by sacrificing, doing things that maybe you're not super passionate about, but they're paying for your way to be able to do the things you're super passionate about. And so, so without purpose, as far as like, even if you have a job that you were telling me before, about, hey, I'm not passionate about it. I'm making money. I'm working with the DOJ, for God's sakes. Or I mean, DOD, even bigger. But, I'm missing something. There's something missing here. And you visualized it. You saw it and you pursued it. And now you're living it. And that's exactly what happened here. I saw what it was. I saw the space and I knew what was going to happen in there. I didn't see the people, which was the greatest surprise of my life, which is something you get to experience, right? Every time you're doing a podcast, you get to see this other person. And you didn't know that they were going to be there when you started it, right? And so I think that's the most beautiful thing is the journey of the purpose. But yeah, without purpose and persistence, I think it's a tough go. It's a tough go in this world if you don't have those key components. And so, so whether you're lucky to be able to have your purpose be your sustainability, your ability to provide for yourself and provide for others, or you have to sacrifice and do the job that maybe you're not crazy about, but you get to do the other thing with the other time. That's a blessing. I think that's just that's the blessed life, and the impact you make on the world and the stories that you share hopefully do awaken those who maybe don't have the courage to take the first step, just like the improv, just taking the first step and doing the thing you're passionate about, taking all of the weight and the meaning away from it and just doing it, just trust falling into yourself and doing it is the only way to get it done, because you could think about it until the cows come home, but life is going to come and mess with it anyway. And so if it's meant to be and you're purposeful about it and you're passionate about it, whatever storm comes, you just kind of navigate through and, you expect it and you enjoy the ride because you get to do the thing you're passionate about. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Cool podcast.
Thank you for that. Totally. And I'll definitely leave all the links in the show notes for people to connect with you and all that. But yeah, you guys have jam days every Wednesday?
Yeah, every Wednesday. Every Wednesday from 1 to 4, people are jamming here. It's cool. And then Thursday night open mics are amazing because we have a drum circle from 5 to 6, and then open mic from like 6 till 9:30, 10 o'clock sometimes. And it's very diverse, very welcoming, all skill levels, all kinds of things. And that's at 23 Temple Street, New Haven, Connecticut. And musical intervention. Do it.
Awesome. It. Thanks so much, Adam. Thank you for listening to Working Towards Our Purpose. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with a friend or leave a review at Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you'd like to support the show, you can go to my website, workingtowardsourpurpose.com, where you could purchase Working Towards Our Purpose official merchandise. Thanks for listening.